Thank you very much. I will introduce the panels. This session is going to focus on challenges and opportunities in terms of infrastructure. And amongst the panelists, we've got Mark Rosegrant, Director of Environment and Production Technology Division in IFPRI. Then we have Abdoulaye Seck. I'm starting from there, coming this way. Abdoulaye Seck, Associate Professor of Economics, Cheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal. Then we have John Ulimwengu, Senior Research Fellow, West and Central Africa Office, IFPRI in DRC. Then David Adama, Coordinator of Public Financing for Agriculture Action Aid International based in Nigeria. And then we've got Bat Minton at the end there, and he's Senior Research Fellow, Development Strategy and Governance Division in IFPRI. Panelists, you are most welcome. Now, in terms of objective of our panel discussion, we are going to discuss the role of infrastructure in the development process and the extent to which weaknesses around the infrastructure sectors may slow down or jeopardize the sustainability of ongoing recovery processes. It is hoped that the panel will point to innovative options to bridge the infrastructure gap that separates African countries and their competitors in the global economy. What we'll do is I will ask the panelists each a question, and then after that, depending on whether other questions arise, then I will open it up to the floor for additional questions from the audience. I would like to start with Mark. Governments face a host of constraints, critical among them being financial resources to invest in many competing priorities. It is recognized that the guiding principle for public investments should be the expected returns on individual investment options. From your work on drivers and determinants of growth and the role of different categories of investments, what are your views on the extent of lost potential for growth in African countries from underinvestment in the different types of infrastructure required? What would be the expected impact of the given constraints on the desired accelerated growth in the productivity for African agriculture?
Oh, thank you very much. Of course, that's a huge question, but let me try to address it a bit. Maximo just did a great job of laying out the sort of infrastructure gap or infrastructure deficit. And yeah, I think it would take another major research project to try to translate that into lost productivity growth over time. But what I'd like to do is do just a little thought experiment of comparing growth in Africa these past couple of decades with growth in many of the Asian countries at a similar state of development during the past, during the previous couple of decades. My colleague Alejandro Nin-Prat at IFPRI has done a lot of work on keep looking at total factor productivity growth in agriculture, particularly in Africa south of the Sahara. His latest work, latest estimates for the period 1995 to 2001, which that's the period where we started to see this revival of growth in Africa. The total output growth in agriculture is about 1.4% per year, of which about 1% a year was total factor productivity growth, and about 0.4% per year was increases in inputs in agriculture, land, labor, capital, working inputs like fertilizer. I think we need to compare that to get an idea of sort of the substantial magnitude of losses from this infrastructure gap. If you looked at the main Asian countries during the periods of 1970s to 2000s, when they sort of took off one after another with rapid agricultural growth that was then translated also into rapid economic growth, most of those countries had periods of 15 to 20 years during that time, in which they had 3% or more output growth, so double the output growth in Africa during this most recent period, of which 2% per year was total factor productivity growth and 1% a year was input growth. And some of them, of course, did much better. I mean, China had periods of 10 years where they had 6 to 7% agriculture growth and with 4 to 5% TFP growth. But so that you're seeing is basically a shortfall of about 1/2 in terms of total factor productivity. 1% per year in total factor productivity growth is a huge loss over time. In addition, I would argue that a significant amount of the shortfall in growth in inputs is also due to poor infrastructure, because this doesn't pay farmers to use more inputs as well. And of course, there's a lot of different causes for differential growth rates, soils, water, policy, governance. But I would argue, based on various case studies, if you look at case studies over the past couple decades in both Africa and Asian countries, looking at sort of the multipliers between investments in infrastructure and investments in agriculture research and development as they impact on GDP growth, a very significant part of that gap is, I think, due to infrastructure issues, and as well as the ag R&D. So I think we can see significant costs, and it'd be really good going forward to work with Maximo and stuff on trying to look at what are the payoffs to the kinds of reforms and analyses that he's talking about. I'd just like to make one final note to bring back a little bit of an addition to what Maximo was saying about how do you get this going. And this was actually brought up by Jean this morning in his comment, that in order to increase the amount of money available to invest in public goods such as infrastructure and ag R&D, there has to be a real change in government expenditure patterns away from private goods to these public goods. The investment in private goods, such as subsidies on fertilizer, water, energy, and many other aspects of the economy, has crowded out the private sector investments that could have gone into those, leads to significant misallocation of resources by sending the wrong price signals across sectors, and then, of course, greatly reduces the amount of funding available at the government level for these essential productivity-driving investments. So I think that's one of the key things that has to be done on top of the great ideas Maximo had about how to increase the efficiency of any given amount of funds. Thank you.